Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Akibatun lil mustaqim wala urwana wa ala ila ala dalimeen. Muhammadan huwa Sayyidina Makbubana inhu kana Sayyidin Mursaleen. Salawatu Allah Ta'ala wa salamuhu alayhi. Assalamu alaikum rahmatullahi barakatuh lil ikhwani fati fi din. Wassalamu ala mani taba huda lil ikhwani fati fi Afrika, Europa, America, Caribbean, wa kulli makan. Halim wa salim bikum. Anjurama to my Kobe community and my brothers and sisters. I will be covering a topic today to clear up some matters because we've been having coups after coups, as you notice. And there's a lot of talk, of course, in the Western media and even in the African media as well. And there's some things that we should clear up. We should get down to the bare essence of this, because the Sahel and West Africa in particular has been playing a game of death for, thousands of years, okay? Bottom line. And we should talk about this. Now, many people will say, well, I really don't care, because I'm living very well. I'm living in Zambia, or I'm living in some other place, and so forth and so on, where perhaps it's quiet and tranquil at this time. But the African continent is evolving. As you see, we're starting to have a lot of Africans are coming forward to talk against their colonial masters. And some are even taking action by removing their languages and by removing their troops from their land. And we're starting to see this. If the African governments will get in unison and all issue a resolution in the AU to condemn the neo-colonialism that's definitely still taking place, and by reshaping the agreements they had with the West. But they won't do this because we still have too many African leaders who are bought and paid for and very, very weak, and they're nothing no more than Western puppets. So this is a problem. And there's been reports, I read a report here where it was exposed that the Western powers, the Tuba powers, are working in conjunction with one another in this regard to kill off African leaders who oppose them. And see, we have a dual side of this. We have the Tuba, who has been in our lands here and on this continent since about the 1400s, been taking resources, human resources, and they're willing now to kill as many as they can to keep these resources. Why? Because especially in Europe, the African continent every day enriches the Western powers. They're taking millions out from our resources, and we're getting nothing in return for it. And now some of our brothers and sisters in many African states are throwing out their president to the chagrin of the Tuba powers, because they're tired of it. And because of the worldwide media now, they can pull up Google and they can find that somebody is shown where their president has got $6 trillion in various Western banks when he's living in squalor. He doesn't even have a toilet or running water. This president his daughters are marrying, and they're spending $4, $5, $6 million US on the wedding, when people can't even buy fish from a marketplace. We're starting to see this happen. The game of death that's following West Africa is very, very telling. When in 2000, I'll get into this with notes and so forth. I want to tell you something that a very wise old man told me in 2002 when I visited Ghana. And I've told this story before, but some have never heard this. And I spent a good amount of time with this brother who's now passed on, this elder. And he gave me a lot of insight. I mean, he really changed me. He began to move me towards Islam. I did not know at the time he was a Muslim, but I saw the village, how meticulous, but they were very, very careful. And I didn't know what was going on, because when it was time to pray, I noticed I was always ushered back into his house, his compound. I didn't really fully understand what's going on, but he wanted me to listen, because he's afraid that if he said and tried to push me towards Islam, I would not hear him. It was very wise. But anyway, he had made a comment talking about the game of death. And he had made comments about something that was told to him that's been handed down for centuries from all these wise men. And he was talking about how there's signs of this death. And it's very, very poignant, but I won't get into it because it's a long diatribe that he gave me talking about this. And he gave these signs talking about the game of death. And it's very, very, very telling. So we look at this now, brothers and sisters, and we see the Sahel region in particular. If you notice something, brothers and sisters, the most volatile region in Africa is here. The most killings and wanton murder, okay, is where? Here. Some of our greatest resources is here. The greatest or strongest Islamic insurgencies is here. The greatest, longest, everlasting sultanates, the powers, the emirates, the Islamic jihad is here. The game of death began from the 1400s and essentially to the period we see today is here. This is the region also we could call slave states, because they took 12 million from this region. 12 million, our African ancestors, was enslaved first in the Sahel, in the coastal West African states, and then brought into the Americas, the West Indies, South America. You know the whole story to that. And how many millions died, were killed by the Tubab when he enslaved, and you heard the horror stories that when they had maybe food had started to run out, they begin to throw our ancestors and stuff overboard. They would get them on a chain, and they would calculate how much food they would have. These Tubab bastards who did this on these ships would calculate. They didn't have enough food. They miscalculated food, or maybe the food became rotten, or maybe they had a storm and some of the food was swept overboard. So they begin to calculate that maybe they only had enough food, say, for 100, but they had 150 African ancestral slaves on the ship. So what they would do, they would get these 50 and tie chains around, heavy chains around their ankles, and throw them overboard. This is how cruel it was. This is a game of death, brothers and sisters. We had other Africans who tried to rebel on these slave ships going to the Americas. And we had pregnant sisters who were pregnant with the babies of the Tubab, because they were raping many of our women. They would cast themselves overboard. It was read by one of the slavers at the time when he had his journal, that he said that every time he would look up, there were sharks following the boats, because they knew because the sharks are very intelligent creatures. They're very, very intelligent. they know that what they sense, they know the slave ships, they always threw dead Africans overboard. So they were feed off the human remains. So we know West Africa and the Sahel region to be a game of death. Death follows it. Death permeates in it. Death is used as a vehicle to subjugate and to sterilize and to cause further harm, and also to carry on the devil's work. West Africa was made into slave states, brothers and sisters. And those slave states is so volatile. The most volatile region, as I said now, is in the Sahel. In particular, the most volatile region. The strongest, most volatile Islamic insurgencies. It's not North Africa, it's the Sahel. The most mass killings, I'm talking about in unison, is where? In the Sahel. West Africa became so volatile after the 700. When 700 arrived, you remember something. Our Fulani brothers and sisters were the first of the Muslims. Our Hausa brothers and sisters were right behind them. And 700 began the first stages of the game of death. Because our brothers took Islam hard, and they took it fundamentally. So much so that when you talk about North Africa, when you talk about Morocco, you heard me talk about this many times. I told you that the 5 great sultanates of Morocco are no more than Fulani sultanates, because the basis of their people came from the Senegambia region and from Mauritania and that region there. The Sadiyin, the Murabitun, the Muwahidun, the Marin, the Sadiyin, the Alawin, all of them had genesis from black folk, from the Senegambia region. Yes, they began to come up and they intermarried. As you heard me talk about in one of my previous shows, I gave the evidence showing how there was the intermarriage between the Fulani, the Bambara. They intermarried with the Tuareg woman a lot, the Amazigh woman. There was, because they were herders of cattle. They both lived and dwelled in the desert. So there was none of the stuff that we have today. So there was a lot of marriage going on. I know that because my great grandmother, about 5th generations down, she was that. She was Amazigh and Fulani. So that mixture is not something that's so uncommon, because the people live right next to one another. So it was not uncommon. It's just the fact that the Fulani factor, as you heard me talk about in my show, I don't know, about 6 months ago, I gave the reasons what happened, why we disappeared in the region. So they began to adopt Amazigh. And from this point, then somehow or another, the Fulani factor was erased. See, but the 700 begins the real game of death, because as the Muslims begin to take Islam Islamically and fundamentally, take it good, then they begin to spread, and they begin to fight others who are not as willing to accept it, and who fought, especially our Fulani brothers and Hausa brothers and so forth and so on, and fight them to stop this spread of Islam. So they begin to have, multi wars, and there was a lot of stuff going on. So now here's the key, brothers and sisters. You see all this uproar. African pundits, Tuba pundits, Asian pundits, everybody's talking about all the coups that's happened there, is happened here now in West Africa, and so forth and so on. Ain't nothing new, brothers and sisters. Let me tell you something. There's been regime changes since about the 1400s. No, 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 about the 1000s. Regime change. In the 700s too, you can say that. There's been regime changes. This has not stopped. The only difference is now is that these are not Islamic emirates and sultanates. These are democratic ways and means. So this is, but we still have these changes. And this game of death has just evolved. It's democratic. Our leaders want to spread democratic ways and means. In the past, our strong ancestral brothers spread Islam and the Sharia law. Here now, our leaders are spreading disbelief, misguidance, jahil, ignorance, and so forth and so on in governance, and want to spread this. This is the difference between that and say in the 1800s, when we have Islamic empires stretching all the way back. There were regime changes. The Bambara would unseat the Fulani. The Fulani would come back to unseat the Mandinka. Okay, it was going on and on. One said the other one was the Islamic empire became weak and corrupted, so the Bambara would come in and take over. The Fulani would regroup and then say, "Hey, we have a new group here, and we want to because now the Bambara is weak, so they go in and have sometimes they have a war, and they take over again, Islamically, because they said the Bambara empire was not right." So we've had this change, and it goes on and on. It's nothing new, brothers and sisters. Pick up your history. Don't let the West fool you and think that this is some big prevalent thing that's happened and it's only happened now. It's not true. In West Africa in particular, we've had regime changes and so forth and so on, violent regime changes from about the 700s, when Islam began to take fold. And the brothers began to sweep through West Africa and the Sahel, and then all through North Africa, like a hot butter through hot knife through butter. See, so now why is this region so hot and incendiary? Regime changes, Islamic regime, sultanates, emirates, human trafficking, the Tubab indirect rule, wanton murder, ethnic strife, stolen wealth, weak leaders. All of these things we've had what you call those fiefdoms. We've had all kinds of stuff go on in West Africa and the Sahel region in particular. So this is there's this reason. It's because of the wealth of it. This region has a lot of mineral wealth, and it has other resources too. So much so that the human resources is what the Europeans found as the biggest commodity. But after that, then they begin to take out our diamonds and all that other stuff, and they became wealthy as heck from these diamonds and gold and other minerals. That's why France now is ready to kill everybody they can in Africa in order to keep their hold over African states that they were running, because they were taking stuff out for nothing, and they had rulers who were giving it to them for nothing. And now the people begin to speak, and they said, "We're tired of it." So why do the Tubab concentrate so hard on the Sahel and West Africa in particular? From the beginning, the 1400s, the Portuguese found robust Black folk. As they begin to make their way around, this is why, again, brothers and sisters, the historical thing, you see now the white racism, Tubab racism is really, even among some of our Arab and some of our Amazigh brothers and sisters are now taking the mantle of the racist Tubab, claiming just about everything is white. But this is a fact. The brothers and sisters in West Africa begin to see the Tubab around about the 14th century. So these things that was happening in the 7th century, 8th century, all the way up, the Tubab was not running it. It couldn't be, because the vast majority of the Africans did not begin to see Tubab faces until about the 1400s. But the Portuguese found robust black folk. And as they begin to spread their poison of white supremacy, and they begin to conquer areas, and they find the Americans already found, the Indians had already found it. They came and they found them there. So, and when they began to enslave the Indians, as you know the story, they could not handle it. And then the disease also killed our Indian brothers. They were not accustomed, they did not have colds and flus and sexual malaises that the Portuguese and the Spanish brought to the New World, so-called New World. It killed millions of them. So they began to import robust black folk. And they found black folk that was already, they were farmers, artisans, carpenters, you name it, rice farmers. There was a lot of stuff. So they took that. It was rich in natural resources and the human resources, as you heard me say. So they began to kill and they began to pit Africans against one another, as you know the story. And that's how my ancestors end up in the United States. And I was born there. Now, we talked about the coups. And you heard me mention here about the excuse me, brother, since I'm over trying to do something here. The coups are nothing new. The game of death, the brothers and sisters have been overthrowing one another over various reasons. And so these coups that are transforming are nothing new. And the killing behind it is nothing new. This is something that, again, we have to be very, very poignant of and very careful of, not to sensationalize it, to make it appear as though this is the only time it's happened. It's recent times. It's not. And now some of our African leaders are becoming very shrewd because they say they know they've gotten wise to what's happened. They found, as you see all of these latest, the difference between the 700s and the 1800s, our black folk were not trained by the Americans. Our black folk weren't trained by the Europeans. You see, now our greatest and best army minds are trained by the Tuba. Now our West African governments and some of the other African governments are starting to get wise up now. And they have been sending their brightest military minds overseas, only for them to come back to overthrow them or plot against them. So now we've got reports, Rwanda, some others have fired and retired some of these generals who have been trained overseas, especially by the Americans. They've got the picture now. So they're chopping the head of the first stage of the coup because these leaders are trained outside. So West African generals are trained by the Tuba Western powers. Their first loyalties, that's wrong, are to the Western taskmasters. They go there, spend 6 months a year. They get paid, they get trained and whatnot. Then they basically sign their souls to the Americans and the French in particular. And so when the American intelligence agencies call in and say, look, we need to get an understanding on what's going on, they give them a briefing. When they find that the government is moving away from the interests of the West, then they give them the order to overthrow them. This is the bottom line. You know the proof we have on that because I gave you what happened when we had a big hearing there in the United States. It was exposed, and the Pentagon finally admitted that they were funding and also training African leaders, military personnel to overthrow our governments. So this is very interesting. and they were trained to remove our Western, should be Western, and despotic leaders and install their own puppets. Again, the West installs the puppets, and then when one begins to act up, they put another one in there, and they use those militaries who they have trained to do their overthrow for them. They train others to overthrow. Again, it's like a series of things. This part of the game of death is what happens when they find populations like the Fulani people who have been traditional Muslims, who have been very strong in their jihad. This is why in the Sahel region, in West Africa in particular, everybody's got a problem with the Fulani. And they all make it a point to kill them. This is because the West is orchestrating this. And the West has paid, as you heard me talk about, our governments in West Africa and the Sahel region to fight against all of the three major groups that you heard me say who have been strong in jihad, who do not want to live under democratic ways and means. That's the Fulani. Okay, that is the Tuareg and the Arabs. And so this is what has happened. And to keep the West destabilized, the people they keep our people mired in conflicts. You notice there's regime changes, there's demonstrations. All of this stuff here is designed so the West can continue to keep their stranglehold over our states and then remove our resources from the region. And then in the meantime, brothers and sisters, they have black faces to do the killing for them. So this game of death has evolved from the 700s to the 1800s. Is regime changes. They fought against the slavers, the Portuguese. You know about the sultanates of Morocco, especially the last three sultanates, the Mariin, the Sadiin, which is my ancestry. The Sadiin people, the Sadiin, again, are Fulani. Make no doubt about that. I showed that. I gave you the proof on this. They were Fulani people because they came from the region where a lot of Fulani were, and there's documents showing that they came to this region. So don't be confused when I say Morocco. You say, because you look at the people that's in the central to the north, who they feature most because they're very light-skinned and straight hair. Some have curly hair. And you say, oh, no, because Morocco is Arab. Morocco is not Arab. Morocco is Amazigh and Tuareg. Bottom line, brothers and sisters, I live here almost 20 years. I'm telling you now. And from central to south, the people are a lot like me. And the people are mixed. The people are Fulani and Amazigh, Bambara, Amazigh. Okay, some are even Mendika, because Mendika has come in there as well and mixed with the Amazigh. So the sultanates that you understand, don't let anybody fool you, brothers and sisters. The five sultanates, the king of Morocco today, he will tell you straight out. His grandmother was what? A Fulani woman. She was Fulani. See, they have been marrying with the Fulani people for centuries, brothers and sisters. So Morocco, that's why you look, even though you see light skin, but there's other, I don't want to get into some of the physical. I got into this in other classes about how you can tell. And my teacher was who there in Ghana gave me good education about, because I asked him the first time, I didn't realize that. He explained something to me. He said, look, don't look at the girls from the north and you think that they're European. He said, they're not. And he gave me proof why they're not. I won't get into that at this time. But I talked about this in another class because it's kind of sexually charged. And so I don't want to get into that. But anyway, brothers and sisters, the destabilization is something that is prevalent among the Europeans, and they continue to do it. Now, those sultanates I was talking about and whatnot, from the 700s all the way to the 1800s, the regime changes. There were wars and so forth and so on. People died because of those wars. The 1400s began the second game of death of the human resources. The human resources meaning they took slaves. The West Africa, as we understand it today, is nothing more than slave states. because they took out 12 million. See, so they took out the 12 million and they killed how many other millions in the process? How many when our turncoat Africans who assisted them, they would go into the interior, and then they would kill many Africans, and when they made their raids, and they would kill our brothers and sisters, and then what was remaining, they would enslave them and take them to the coast. So that's the second game of death. The second part of the game of death was the slavery. So again, the first game of death was because of the Islamic revival. Islam began to spread, and as the Islam began to spread, they fought the Juju, they fought the Obia, they fought the Ifa, they fought the Voodoo, and Obia, and so forth and so on. All the traditional African religions, and those who were animists and so forth and so on, they fought them, and in fighting, they killed in order to spread Islam. See, so that's the first game. The 1400s begin the second game of death, where we had slavery, and many people still trying to, even our African brothers and sisters today, even minimizes the thing of slavery. West Africa today is still depopulated because of the slavery. And the second part of the game of death, they killed, and they killed millions, and then took 12 million from West Africa as a second part of the game of death. Now, brothers and sisters, we see the ECOWAX has been exposed for what it is. We know it's a Western-backed flunkies. Now, why is this part of 3 of the game of death? Because the part 3 of game of death is that we had the colonial period and Africans died. You know what, King Leopold, he killed millions there. I don't want to get into that. The colonial people, they killed millions of us also. Okay. But that's part of the slavery legacy, because they basically enslaved the Africans here as well. Colonization is just a glorified word for slavery, because they ran you, even though you might not have been working on a plantation like our ancestors did in the United States, but you were still working on their behalf. So the ECOWAX today is in the forefront of spreading democracy, and their aim is to appease, to allow the Western states to can still control us. And now we have this who vowed to take out Niger. We cannot take these. They can't even take out. This is what is interesting. The ECOWAX can't even defeat the Boko Haram. Now, I've said this many times, and they have a hard time even fighting the Fulani herdsmen. So how are they going to go out and take out Niger? You know why? Because they're assuming the Americans and the French are going to back their play and come in and do something. The Americans may be ruthless, but they're intelligent. They're going to weigh their options, because they go and enter the fray there. They got to bring soldiers into the fray inside these regions, and it's a death trap for them. They may be able to do things from the air, but if they do enter this, they're going to push ECOWAX and have black folk die for them, because they'll bark out and say, look, I want you to go take these people out in the desert. They're going to get ambushed. They may send one advisor here and there, and he may get killed in the ambush as well. But as far as many troops, those troops will be in a safe position, because this area, brothers and sisters, again, is a game of death. It's a death zone. And the Americans know it. This is not Afghanistan. This is not Iraq or Syria. This is Africa. This is the Sahel. And the brothers run different than they do than Afghan brothers. They run different than our Afro-Arab brothers of the Jazeera Arab, which we call the Middle East. Our brothers in these regions are rough. This is why they were taken as slaves, because the Portuguese came to these regions and they found robust black folk. And he knew that they would be able to toil the land, pick cotton, grow what you call it. Matter of fact, I had a taste for to eat that the other day. Sugar cane. We have that here in Morocco. We have sugar cane here in Morocco. But this, so they saw that. See, so this is, and now we have the violent. We have a lot of stuff going on. You know what's going on now about with Russia's into the play in this and so on and so on. But don't go to sleep on the Mujahideen groups. They've been quiet. They're sitting back watching all these coups happen. And there's going to be some problems that they surface here pretty soon. The game of death played by U.S. allows them to determine what is a coup and what is not. Brothers and sisters, we go back again to the same issue as we've been talking about terrorists. It's only them. There's an interesting article by The Intercept talking about this same issue. The Americans determine who is a terrorist. They can't be terrorists, even though they may kill millions or they may kill people grotesquely. They may help to overthrow somebody, but they don't call this terrorism. See? And so they determine when it's a coup. When the generals who are trained by them overthrow a Sahel state or West African state, they don't say, or North African state, they don't say that's not a coup. According to what this proof they give you, it's very interesting. But when these generals are trained by the French or the Spanish or the British or by the Russians, then they consider it a coup. So again, the Americans are defining what is a coup, who is a terrorist, and it only benefits them because they don't want to be exposed. When the general who's trained in America is like right now, you saw the proof I gave you that is exposed. Some of the generals that the new regime in Niger, they're in trouble. They've hired a lot of these generals who were trained by the Americans, and I said it. That means they have one foot in, ready to overthrow this bunch they got in there now in Niger. So this third stage of the game of death is a serious one because this affects all of us. Because when the people begin to run out, they run everywhere. They go to North Africa. You see, they've been getting on boats anyway and dying in the Mediterranean. Now people are starting to leave out in droves. And then we have many of our North African governments, especially in Libya, in Tunisia. You know the horror stories, what's going on against our African brothers there. And in Libya, we heard about they have dungeons where our sisters who are desperate to get away from the war zone, from the Mujahideen, get away from the government and so forth and so on, only to come into Libyan jails and get ravished. See, so this third game of death is a serious matter, and we have no remedies for it whatsoever. And like this article talking about, the Pentagon refuses to say that Niger president, the situation there was a coup. Okay, it goes into a lot of stuff about their military aid and about the governments and how they are run. Brothers and sisters, if you notice, I'm going to do something about here, inshallah ta'ala, about the democratic ways and means. Again, I'm going to give you some proofs about something because I'm leading you to this, and why I don't want to hear brothers and sisters champion democratic ways and means, because if you're a Muslim, you should not. And I'm going to say this for the record. The BRICS, whatever they call it, the new economic bloc, is not going to succeed. It's not because the Americans are not in it and the French are not in it. It's because they don't have a economic base. I say this for the record now. I don't care what group you call it. You can call it tiddlywinks. I don't care what you call it. If it's not going to run the Islamic economic base system, it's going to fail, because the democratic economic systems are failing everybody. This what also leads to the coups. And I'll get into that another day, inshallah ta'ala. When the coup is homegrown, initiated by other Western powers, the Americans say, okay, this is a coup. When in fact, it may not be necessarily that. And this is why the definition of coup d'etat has to be redefined again, because the Americans have defined it what benefits them, which they always do. They've always been selfish. It's either them or everybody else. That's the way it is. So, and again, here is talking about the so-called terror attacks and whatnot. We may have a fourth game of death that may arise, which I believe, it will arise. The Mujahideen groups who are steadily getting stronger will become more stronger and more violent. And we're going to have a lot of killings. When they begin to seize power and take these governments over, you're going to have a lot of killing. And if you want to see remnants of that, if you look at what happened with Usman Dan Fodio, when he began his jihad, his hijra and jihad, I wish I can get his treatise when he wrote that, about how to make hijra, which is migration, and jihad. Brothers who read this told me it's a masterpiece. It's an out-and-out masterpiece. I know this is outlawed because, especially in the West, they don't want us to have it. Why? Because, again, the West claim that anything dealing with Islam is stupid, ignorant, it doesn't work. Why do they spend trillions fighting it if it didn't work? Because if it didn't work, they don't care. They let it go. But it works. That's why they fight it. And they know, and this is why many who side with the Americans are fearful of the Fulani herdsmen in particular, because they feel they're regenerating the aims of the great Sultan Usman Dan Fodio. See, and so this is why they have this great fear. And so the Americans again are redefining many different things. When they kill, it's not terrorism. When we fight them back, it's terrorism. When they train the generals to overthrow the government, they don't call that a coup. But if the French do it, then it's called a coup d'etat. And speaking of that, where is it at here? Yeah. Brothers and sisters, remember I told you about something? There's a lot of talk about what's happening in Gabon. The ruling class, again, under democratic ways and means. I don't want to get deep into this, but it allows for this type of crap where somebody can stay and family can stay in power for 50, 60 years. They can kill their way, corrupt their way, and keep the power. But the people spoke there in Gabon, and then they threw this man out. But there's an element that people didn't talk about that's now starting to surface. There's an ethnic element to this, brothers and sisters. Remember what I've been trying to tell you. I'm getting close to closing as well here pretty soon here. That the ethnic makeup, if you don't have a playbook, brothers and sisters, in many African states, you cannot understand what's going on there, because you need to understand what's there in the ethnic groups in it and the loyalties, because a lot of this, even Gabon, there's some elements now saying it's ethnic. I read something about what African brothers said about this, and it's very true what he said. See, so could be the situation. Not only about the family, but there's an ethnic equation to this. See, so the Western powers arm our Sahel states to fight and kill on their behalf. This is the part of the game of death, brothers and sisters, that we have, which is the third part of the game of death, the Western powers and what they're doing, again, the overthrowing and causing coups and causing a lot of mayhem and causing death. We have now mass murders, 300, 500. You heard me talk about class, especially Fulani. The Fulani is taking the brunt of this, encouraging under their guise, under this under their powers, the mafias have gained a foothold in North Africa and West Africa in particular, under democratic ways and means, encouraging mafias and other criminal organizations. Drug trafficking now is starting to reach North Africa, and we have drug cartels. If this was the Sharia law, no. And if one was discovered, it would be nipped in the bud before it can even graduate. But because of democratic ways and means, this stuff is allowed to flourish, and it's a killing behind it. So all of this stuff, and then you have the prostitution, is killing behind it. You have human trafficking, it's killing behind it. You see, all of this adds to the third game of death, the killing. Prostitution and the pimps and so forth, and the conglomerates who run this, they kill to keep this going. We have the mafias who running their empires, running minerals and so forth. So they kill to stay in power. We have the criminal organizations who are drugs and other commodities. They kill. We have killing each way you turn, left, right, but front, back. I mean, it's killing all over the place. This is why we need Islamic governance to stop this BS, to put it to the end, because it will end. The Prophet ﷺ told us that. And then the last part of this is the part, again, the third game of death is the killing and interdiction of Muslims. I can't travel to many states. They look at me, they say, no, we have this thing here, it says here that you are a terrorist. And many of my African brothers can't travel to other African states because of what the Tubabs told them. How many scholars, how many Muslims have been killed unjustly because of this game of death, the third stage game of death? See, the farmers responsible for deadly killing of citizens, drug deaths, gangland murders, all this human trafficking. All of this, brothers and sisters, is rising in the game of death that's happening in West Africa and the Sahel, but also it's rising in North Africa as well. Under the democratic ways and means, it's flourishing big time. It's protected. The game of death continues to interdiction of schools as well. When they keep all of this, because the West looks at it from this standpoint, they're looking at the future. When you have all of this turmoil, you have prostitution, you have crime, you have all this corruption, schools are not funded. Our kids are not being educated, so they won't be able to lead. They're going to have to follow. And a Muslim is ordered to be leaders. We are to lead. We're not to follow. We're not to have a Tubab, a kafir, run us and our armies. That is forbidden in Islam. We're supposed to lead, and we're supposed to lead by example. Our schools now is not equipped to train our young people to take over. They're only training them good enough so that way the Tubab continue to be indirectly ruling us. From the 700s to 1800s, the Tubab didn't run nothing. We wouldn't allow that. And when they came out of the Dark Ages, they made their push, but we kicked their butts. See? And now they got a foothold. They don't want to release it. That's why you heard this report now talking about the Western powers plus the Americans. Everybody want to get together and kill all of these leaders who are now talking against who will not kiss their feet. See, so and now in these schools, you look across the side in many places in West Africa where all this turmoil. The teachers because a lot of the teachers are women. Brothers, sisters, you don't hear much about this, but teachers are catching hell. And you read here, teachers are being raped, ravished, arrested, beaten. This is all part of the game of death to keep the Tubab in power. When our kids can't even read and write, when our children can't even look at a map and tell you where South Africa is. This is also prevalent in the United States too, where we have especially Black, Hispanic children. You give them a map and ask them to find Los Angeles, they can't find it. You ask them where the capital of the United States, they don't know it. You give them a map and you ask them, where's Africa? They may be able to find it, but they're not sure. And you ask them, where's South Africa? Well, how about Egypt? They can't tell you. See, this is all by game. It's a game of death. Now, here's the funny thing that's going on too, brothers and sisters, and I will close. The Mujahideen controlled areas is very interesting. The Western curriculum that was taught has been destroyed. The teachers refusing to teach Islamic education and adhere to Islamic dress codes are arrested, and some have been killed. The Mujahideen are running Islamic schools to train people to what? To lead, to run the country, not to allow the Tubab to run roughshod through the land anymore and take all the resources, and to bring law and order and bring what? Peace to the land. This is the difference. I'm not backing the play of ISIS, and because you know how I feel about them and the AQ and that. I'm not backing them. In some of the areas that are run by some other Mujahideen groups and splinter groups, the children are going to school and they're learning, they're getting educated. This is frightening our flunky leaders who are paid by the West and the West, because again, the Mujahideen, by the Sharia law, we're supposed to educate our populations. This is what they're doing, because our Western democratic ways and means are not educating our children. They're just not. I don't care if you come to North Africa, you go to the Sahel region or West Africa, we're not getting the education that we should to lead. Mujahideen say that the Sahel and West African schools aren't training our youth for the future. You read communiques and see some of the interviews conducted with some of these guys. You hear that. Oh, excuse me, brothers and sisters. You'll hear the Fulani herdsmen echo the same thing. They're denied services, common basic services. They can't train their children. Their wives can't have babies in hospitals because the technology hasn't reached them yet. They are training our children only into puppetry. Puppetry meaning for them to worship the Tubab, to learn their languages and their ways and means, and then govern according to what they tell them. So now they are brainwashing them. Even our African youths. When they see another black man, he's suspected. But when they see a Tubab, he's respected. The difference, you see this? You think about that. You take a young African, he's been trained now as in puppetry. He's been trained by the media. He sees the Tubabs controlling things. He's taught their ways and means. So when he sees me, he has disrespect. When he sees the Tubab, he has respect. See, so this is, again, brothers and sisters, a problem. Diplomatic efforts in the Sahel are failed. That's the bottom line. Coup leaders are now, this is what's scaring the West as well. The coup leaders are now starting to, and some of the states are starting to open up for Islamic scholars mediation. The West doesn't want that because the West is trying to destroy Islam. And this aspect is heating up in the Sahel. And the West doesn't favor this approach because they want their face. And I've said this again. These Mujahideen groups in particular don't want to see a Tubab. He come in there with his suit on, pencil neck, talking a lot of stuff. He don't want to hear it because he's wanting to Sharia law. And he's only going to listen to the scholars. And now some of our coup leaders are starting to warm up to the scholars to listen to their wise counsel. We have a mediation going on now with ECOWAS, Nigeria, and the Niger government. Who's in between that now? We have a second group of Nigerian scholars there to mediate. This is the way it should be. The Muslims should be leading. We should be leading the efforts. I'm not talking about the hypocrite Muslims who don't want the Sharia law. We're talking about real rightful scholars. They want to defeat Islam and not allow it to return to the powerhouse it once was. This is another reason why they fight people like me. You hear this, I hear people tell me this all the time. They don't want to see you here. They want to kill you. They want to arrest you. They want to do this. This is not coming from the government, brothers and sisters of Morocco. No, this is not coming from them. This is coming from the hired thugs that the Americans hire. They're ones that'll come to tell me stuff about killing. They'll come over and they'll have people come in the car and they'll come over and try to speak to me in English. Sometimes the English is broken, but I understand the gist. They'll tell me, you're not supposed to go to the masjid. We don't want to see you. We want you to go back to wearing Armani suits like you did in the United States. They'll tell you stuff like that because they said, we don't want to see the people wake up. They'll come and tell me that because the people are now asleep. They dress like them. They want to act like them. They want their leadership. They don't want to see the African scholars anymore and learned intellectuals. They don't want to see that. That's why they want to keep us in the house, because they want to keep the system as it is all through the Sahel, North Africa in particular. All of this is the same. So when a man comes up, like I tell you, like what happened this morning, I come out of the masjid. This guy, when you see his face, I show a picture of him. He looked like he's from the devil. Okay, he spit at me this morning. Yeah. These and this, who is he working with? He's not working with the scholars of Islam. He's working with who? The Americans. I come out of the masjid, get ready to go home. He spit, the spit passed me by. We would have got into it. If he would have spit on me, I'm not going to take that. It came by. I stopped but Shaitan, I said, no, I'm not going to let this. I looked at him and let him know, I know what you're doing. If he would have spit in my face, or I had that happen to me many years back. These people the American knows the devil. He knows the devil very well. That's why he can handpick these people here. I want because we're in Arabic we call najis. They're unclean because they don't take they don't pray, they don't do they're away from Islam. See, so we have a game of death that's being played in North Africa as well. All this is orchestrated by the Americans and by the Western powers. See, so this, all of this stuff is added to the game of death, brothers and sisters. All of this. And each one of us can be disaffected at any time, even me. I don't care who you are. You could run into serious problems because there's a lot of people who are willing to take your life for a few trinkets that the Americans will give them. There's many who will spit at you when you've done nothing to them and kill you where you stand. See? And I think what's going to happen in time, I'm going to see here, we've got, how you doing, my dear brother? Musa, assalamu alaikum. Thank you, my dear brother. I know this is spur of the moment. It's a weekday as well, so we have brothers. But I think in time, brothers and sisters, I'm going to, because I'm going to show you how this game of death, I'm going to start showing you things that's actually happening with me. Because we have two Bob bastards who are something else. And they've already let it know they wanted to kill. We've had other people in the Sahel that have the same problem as me. Who's behind it? The Americans. See, and even though we have laws, the democratic ways and means, you can see they switch it any way they want. I'll get into that. When they want to kill a black man, all of a sudden the laws are passed aside. Have you noticed that? When they want to make a black man disappear, when they want to kill him outright on the streets, the laws, they tweak it to where the people get away with it. And what makes it even bad is African people, I always tell these, and I told a brother, he's from, I don't know, he said he was from Ghana, but I listened to his accent. He wasn't from Ghana. I think he was from Cote d'Ivoire. One day he was following me and so forth. I stopped him and I talked to him a little bit and whatnot. And, I asked him, I said, this American pay you $25,000, 30 dirhams. This is about $3 to come to go and chase me around. And you do that for him. How do you think he felt about you? He probably calls you the NIGG word. And if you went to go ask him for a hand in marriage, he would throw you out. So why are you helping him? And I tell Moroccans the same thing. I said, you go bid, you do the bidding for this man who's a racist. You go over to the embassy and try to get a visa, and you see when you go and tell, look, I did this for this Tubab, he's the agent for the embassy. I did this. They're not gonna give you a visa. They'll laugh at you and throw you out. The same people that many of them go to protect and say, yes, they, Michael is a good man. I like him, and I do what he tells me. He's this and that. Yet still, I go to them and say, you know what? Why don't you go over there and ask for his daughter's hand in marriage and see what he'll call you? All of this, brothers and sisters, is part of the game of death. And the Americans are orchestrating this in this time from the 1400s, around the 1400s, 1500s, the Portuguese and the Spanish begin to do it. And then the Americans and the Europeans begin to take over, and the Americans took it and ran with it and had the most brutal killing system that the world has known. But the Europeans in their colonial state also killed. They killed millions here in Africa, and it should never be forgotten. And our leaders today have forgotten that. They still beckon the call to them. But we have African leaders who are saying no to this now. And it's starting. We have African intellectuals who are talking against them. It's not because we hate the Tubab. We hate the way they're doing things. We don't want their control over us anymore. We don't want them to fund coups anymore. See, so all of this, brothers and sisters, is part of the game of death. And I have to tell you the truth on these matters, because it is a serious, serious thing. When we die, and all of us is going to die. It's just subhanahu wa ta'ala, when he calls up the number, as just the way it is, you go. No one can escape death. I don't care who you are. You cannot escape it. So, but on the same token, you have the right to defend yourself, brothers and sisters. And when our brothers and sisters leave the Sahel region, the West Africa in particular, they're leaving because things happen to them. They can't help themselves. And the game of death follows them. And my teacher in Ghana told me, he said, do you know the game of death? Because he said the dark clouds will hover around you. And he said there was 100 ways to die, and there was only one way to be born. He said the path of death follows mankind from all ages. This is what this old, brilliant, scholarly old man there in Ghana, who I met in 2002, I spent time with, he gave me all of this wisdom. He talked to me about the game of death. And so part of this is in honor of him, because he's passed on now, about 10 years now. He's been passed on about 10 years. But he gave me a lot of wisdom talking about this and how he wanted to see our African states free and open. And he said, it's time now to have healthy relationships with the Tubab in a rightful way, not in the way we have it now. And this is what he urged me. He urged me to do this. He urged me to talk and so forth. He said, look, I give you this, you pass this on. So, brothers and sisters, I will conclude with this, and I will talk to you again about another subject here, about democracy and its effect and whatnot, and how it affects us in a lot of different ways that you don't even think about. And inshallah, I will talk about that. So, brothers and sisters, those who will see this in the future, please subscribe if you like my talk and whatnot, and spread my talk and whatnot. And in the meantime, brothers and sisters, I will leave you with this, and I will see you here shortly at another time here this week sometime, inshallah ta'ala, with billah. And I'll talk about another subject about democracy and how it disaffects us all. Okay, my brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum, rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.